Let's talk about the defensive backs for Syracuse football in 2024.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. On today's show, we are talking about the Syracuse Football 2024 defensive backs. It's going to follow a very similar format to yesterday's podcast, where we talked about the wide receiver position unit. We'll start off with the transfers and the recruits coming in. Then we're going to talk about who is coming back to the team and a comparison to last season. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, so we are going to talk about the defensive backs on today's episode, and we're going to start off with the transfers and the recruits. And leading us off, transfers, is Duce Chestnut, a 6 foot, 205-pound redshirt junior. He's got 2 years of eligibility left. He is a safety or a corner, depends how they want to use him for next season. He transferred back to Syracuse after a year at LSU, where he didn't do a whole lot outside of the first game where he picked off Jordan Travis. If you recall, LSU was playing Florida State in that game. FSU won in a blowout, I believe. That was about it for Duce Chestnut in an LSU uniform, so he is back with Syracuse. He was a freshman All-American in 2021. In 2022, he was honorable All-ACC. So he was really good. He was really good on the Hill. Parlayed that success to LSU. Didn't quite translate. Now he is back with Syracuse. He is a possible bounce-back candidate for this team next season, and he could be moving to safety. Who knows? They do have a lot of safeties and corners right now that they can kind of move in interchangeable parts. I would see him more as a free safety, but regardless, he has cornerback skills, so if they were to move him to safety, I think he would be really solid back there. Moving on, let's go to another transfer. This one is actually new, unlike Duce Chestnut, who is just returning to the team after a season at LSU. That is Devin Grant. I know there's a lot of excitement about him. He is 6'4", 190 pounds. He is a junior with 2 years of eligibility left. He is a safety/corner. He was first team All-MAC selection at Buffalo this past season, and he led his conference with 5 interceptions. Now, what I will say in terms of mid-major, outside of Power 5 schools in football, it's a little bit different than basketball. In basketball, it's more transferable for these guys. No pun intended there, but it's just, you do well at the mid-major level, you go to the Power 5, you might not be as good in basketball, but still you can translate that to success. Sometimes you can get even better, like a Dalton Connect. He blossomed at Tennessee this past season, right? Football, a little bit different. It's going from the MAC to the ACC. It's tough, but he was a first-team All-MAC selection at Buffalo, led the conference with 5 interceptions that I mentioned. He did play mostly safety there, but in the spring game, he did line up as an outside corner. So he does have the size. The question is, does he really have the speed to be an outside corner? During that spring game, he was the corner that was burnt by Zeed Haynes on the near sideline. I get it that Zeed Haynes is fast, but at the same time, you're in the ACC, you're going to go up against some fast wide receivers, especially when they play the tougher competition. So Devin Grant, that's the main question with him, but nevertheless, he is a big body and can be very useful in the red zone for this team next season at guarding big body wide receivers. Next up, we got Clarence Lewis. He is 5'11", 185-pound grad student with 1 year of eligibility left. He is a nickel corner coming from Notre Dame. He played all 50 games with the Irish in his 4 seasons. He has 3 career interceptions with them. I did do a mini podcast on him, so you can check that out after this video. I'll leave a link in the description below to Clarence Lewis. But basically, this is someone who teammates have really praised his work ethic, coaches included. Pro Football Focus, though, says that his weakness is tackling. Given that he's 5'11", 185, that doesn't really surprise me. A little bit on the smaller scale there. Best in the nickel. That's the thing with Clarence Lewis. He did commit right around the time of the spring game. I can't really remember exactly whether it was right before or right after it. But regardless, he did not dress for the spring game, so it was hard to get a read as to how Syracuse will use him next season. My guess is that he's going to fight to be the nickel. So in case you're not aware of what a nickel defense is, it's when a team plays 5 defensive backs on the field. The 5th defensive back is what's called the nickel. And that is where Clarence Lewis did pretty well at Notre Dame while he was there for 4 seasons. Moving on, we got Marcus Washington. If you recall, Mike McAllister, when he was last on the podcast, broke the news while literally being on it during the recording. Marcus Washington, a 6'1" sophomore with 3 years of eligibility left. He is a corner. Former 4-star recruit at Georgia. Fran Brown was his recruiter there. Pretty interesting. And obviously, Fran Brown's now the head coach of Syracuse football, in case you weren't aware. He played 1 game with Georgia in 2022 before then transferring to Louisville, and he did not play last season. Again, this was someone who came actually after the spring game, so it was tough to get a read as to how Syracuse is going to use him next season. My best sense is that he seems like someone who could be a reclamation project. Not a bounce-back candidate, but someone who was a former 4-star recruit at Georgia. He has talent. The question is, can this coaching staff coach him up? They have plenty of years of eligibility to do it for him to one day be a productive corner at the college level, let alone the pro level. So that is it for the transfers. There were 4 of them. Yeah, 4 of them this past season for Syracuse. Duce Chestnut coming back from LSU, Devin Grant from Buffalo, Clarence Lewis from Notre Dame, and Marcus Washington from Georgia and Louisville. So those are the 4 transfers. But Syracuse does have 3 high school recruits coming in on the defensive backs. Once again, we are going over defensive backs here on today's podcast. Let's start off with one of the top recruits for Syracuse football this past offseason, in 2024, I should say, because they've gotten a number of good recruits in 2025 and 2026. But for 2024, Marcellus Barnes, 5'11", 165-pound corner from Chattanooga, Tennessee. He is a 24/7 Sports composite 4-star player, top 30 overall cornerback in the country. Originally was committed to Virginia Tech, but then he decommitted and then chose Syracuse over schools like Georgia and Ole Miss. Imagine Syracuse beating out a 4-star player for Georgia and Ole Miss. I think a common misnomer with the recruiting is that Syracuse has never been able to beat out those top schools for players. They have beaten them out for players. They have beaten out Georgia or an Ole Miss for a player. The difference is that it's usually not for a super quality high school player. Because Georgia and Ole Miss are schools that are getting the best of the best athletes in high school. Marcellus Barnes, composite 4-star recruit, one of the top 30 cornerbacks in the country, that would qualify to me as one of the better athletes in high school. And he chose Syracuse over Georgia and Ole Miss. That is the difference with Fran Brown compared to years prior in recruiting. It's not that they haven't been able to beat out those schools for recruits. It's the quality players that they've been missing out on to those schools. So they got Marcellus Barnes. I would not be surprised if he saw the field for Syracuse, even though he is a true freshman next season. I wouldn't. I would not be surprised at all. He does have a lot of talent. In the spring game, he was primarily used as a backup. He was on the second team, but still, I could see him maybe creeping up. But here's the thing. They don't have to. They don't have to play him. I'll talk about it also with the holdovers from last year. But Syracuse can run a DB lineup of Justin Barron, Alijah Clark, Duce Chestnut, Jayden Bellamy is also back, and Devin Grant. So if you run those 5, Marcellus Barnes can be a depth piece for you, probably appear in every game that Syracuse plays in next season. maybe doesn't get a start, but sees a few snaps at defensive back. Would not be surprised if he saw the field. The next two recruits are probably going to be red shirts for the team next season. Raheem Long Jr., 6 foot, 170 pound corner from Camden, New Jersey. He is a 3-star. And Ibn McDaniels, 6'3", 195 pound corner from Elizabeth, New Jersey. Love the size with him, but also probably a red shirt. That's not bad. It's not bad as a true freshman to redshirt. There are plenty of players who have redshirted in their first season in college football and went on to have successful college and pro careers. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but I promise you it's real. It's happened before plenty of times. I wouldn't worry if they have to redshirt. Not a big deal. So of the three recruits, I would say Marcellus Barnes is the one who is definitely most likely to get on the field for Syracuse football next season. So that about wraps up the newcomers for Syracuse football. Once again, they had 4 transfers: Duce, Chestnut, Devin Grant, Clarence Lewis, and Marcus Washington. And then they had 3 high school recruits: Marcellus Barnes, Raheem Long Jr., and Ibn McDaniels. So that's it for the transfers and recruits. Now coming up, we're going to talk about who's coming back in the defensive backs for Syracuse football next season. The NBA Finals are underway, and the Celtics lead the Mavericks 2-0 in the series. This is looking like it's going to be pretty short. As I've been saying, the Boston Celtics look like the far superior team. So if you want to attend an NBA Finals game in Dallas, because I don't think this is going back to Boston, maybe it does, could be wrong, but I think this might be a sweep. Download Gametime. Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. My favorite part is I get to see the view from my seat before I buy. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you purchase. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we are going over the 2024 Syracuse football defensive backs. Yesterday, we talked about the receivers. We're going on the opposite end, right? Defensive backs. We just went over the transfers and recruits, and now it is time to talk about the holdovers for this team. And leading us off, we got Alijah Clark, 6'1", 185-pound safety with 1 year of eligibility left. He has been a starter for the last 2 seasons at Syracuse. He also started his career at Rutgers, where I believe he played 7 games with them or made 7 starts with them, mixing up in my head. But regardless, there's the number 7 that's involved. He only has 1 career interception. I would like if he can get 1 this year for Syracuse. I hope. Not to say that interceptions are everything. I'm a Jets fan. Darrelle Revis 1 year, I believe it was 2010. He was a first-team All-Pro with 0 interceptions the entire season. So interceptions are not everything. They're not necessarily the greatest stat when it comes to judging how a defensive back does. But at the same time, I'd probably like more than 1 in your entire career. So Alijah Clark, maybe he does get 1 this season for Syracuse. It would be his first in a Syracuse uniform. He does project to be the starting safety once again for Syracuse next season. So that's Alijah Clark. He was also, I think, a snub from the top 10. I didn't have him in my top 10. Maybe you do. Tomato, tomato. Maybe he will be a top 10 player for this team next season. Anyways, let's move on to someone who actually did make my top 10 list. And I believe he was number 6. And that is Justin Barron, 6'4", 230-pound rover, defensive back, whatever you want to call him. He is a converted wide receiver in his last year of eligibility. He was honorable all ACC last season. He had a career high 90 tackles, and he played most of it, as I said a couple days ago, with a broken hand. So if he was honorable all ACC with a broken hand, who knows what he can do this season when he has two functioning hands? Can't be worse. And he was actually pretty good. So maybe he'll even be better just because he has two hands. Good for Justin Barron. Anyways, let's move on now to Jayden Bellamy, 5'11", 185-pound corner with 3 years of eligibility left. He started his career at Notre Dame before he transferred to Syracuse heading into last season. After not appearing in any games with Notre Dame, he made 7 starts after taking over for Jeremiah Wilson, who was struggling last year, and he had a pick 6 against Pitt. So that was pretty cool. He was also on the first team for Syracuse during the spring game. So I imagine it's a pretty good indicator that he is probably going to be a starting corner for this team next season. Would not be surprised considering he started 7 games last year. He's a young guy. Still got 3 years of eligibility left. Not surprising at all. Probably going to be a starting corner for Syracuse football next season. Moving on, we got Greg Delane. He is 6 foot, 180-pound corner with 3 years of eligibility left as well. Former ESPN 4-star recruit in 2022. He appeared in every game last season, but he only made 1 start, and that was against Boston College. I mean, remember that Boston College game? That was not particularly fun to watch. Not necessarily because of Greg Delane, but it's just, if you're trying to get someone into football, and it's tough. It's kind of tough to get someone into football when they already set in their mind that they don't really like it or they don't understand it. If you're trying to get someone into football, I would highly suggest not showing them Syracuse Boston College last season. That wasn't fun at all. Not necessarily because of Greg Delane, no. But during the spring game, he lined up with the second team for the most part. So I project him to be more of a depth piece for next season, and not necessarily bad. You do need players. As I said with the receivers, you need players. This is football. So Greg Delane, a solid depth piece for Syracuse next season. That is his projection. Moving on to another player who started that Boston College game in his only start of the season is Jaden Gould, 6'2", 205-pound corner or safety with 3 years of eligibility left. He transferred from Nebraska after only playing for once. He only played 1 game for Nebraska in 2022. He did appear just like Greg Delane. He appeared in every single game for Syracuse last season, but made 1 start. That was Boston College. He also lined up with the second team during the spring game, so another depth option for the Orange. And rounding it out is Barry Buxton, 6'2", 205-pound safety with 2 years of eligibility left. He transferred from Santa Barbara City College heading into last season. He appeared in 9 games. He is a depth piece. He was mostly on special teams last year as well. So of the holdovers, I would say 3 of them are probably starters for next year. You got Alijah Clark, you got Justin Barron, and you got Jayden Bellamy. If you only play 4 defensive backs, then maybe one of them comes out. But regardless, if they play 5 defensive backs, so the nickel, then Alijah Clark, Justin Barron, and Jayden Bellamy will all be on the field. Whereas Greg Delane, Jaden Gould, and Barry Buxton are more depth pieces in the secondary for this team next season. So that's who's coming back for Syracuse football in the defensive back room. Now coming up, we're going to do a little bit of a comparison, just like last episode, a comparison to last season. Is this year's group better or worse? Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we are going over the 2024 Syracuse football defensive backs. We talked about the transfers and the recruits coming in. We also discussed who is coming back for this team next season. And now it's time to do a comparison to last year and whether or not it's better or worse. And what I will say is, I think that this group is deeper than last year, for sure. It's definitely deeper. And there's certainly a lot more experience that has been added to the roster. If you recall the week 1 depth chart for this team, just go take a peek at it. After this podcast, go take a peek at the 2023 depth chart heading into week 1 and how many freshmen there were on it. How many redshirt freshmen there were. It's usually not what wins in college football. So many young guys in that secondary last season. So this year, they bring in Devin Grant, they bring in Duce Chestnut, obviously coming back, and they bring in Clarence Lewis. So that hopefully solves the experience problem. And plus, everyone on the team that's coming back gets a year older. So I think it's deeper and it's more experienced. Now, there are 2 big questions with the secondary, and that is the fact that Alijah Johnson and Jason Simmons are gone for Syracuse next season. They're both trying to make it in the NFL. So good for them. Hopefully they do make it and can carve out successful pro careers. They were some of the top defensive backs for Syracuse last season. So the questions are, can Duce Chestnut, if he moves to safety, can he replace Jason Simmons? And can Devin Grant replace Alijah Johnson? That's what it comes down to. Are those 2 better than the previous 2? Because Syracuse retained starters. They got Alijah Clark back. They got Barron back. And they got Jayden Bellamy back. And all of them could be even better with another year of development. But can Duce Chestnut and Devin Grant be better than the duo of Jason Simmons and Alijah Johnson? That is really the 2 big questions, but mainly it's kind of one big question with this secondary next season to determine if it's better or worse. Now, I think it should be noted, I don't think you can do this video justice without mentioning that Fran Brown was a defensive backs coach at Georgia. He's very experienced with defensive backs. So, I would hope, considering that players have called him one of the best, if not the best, defensive backs coach in the country, I would sincerely hope that his coaching can elevate the players that are on the roster. It's about squeezing out every ounce of ability that each player has. That's really the job of a coach. That's the job of a coach. Every player has a ceiling. Every single player in any sport has their ceiling. They all do. The job of a coach is to maximize it. Try to get them to that potential. That's the goal. So if the expectation is one day they can be the best player in college football, the coach's job is to make them or to facilitate them becoming the best player in college football. Or if they're, you get the idea. You get the gist. So Fran Brown, a defensive backs coach, I understand that now he is the head coach, so he has to worry about everyone. But still, Syracuse should have a better secondary this year, in part because their head coach is a former defensive backs coach at Georgia, and Georgia has not allowed any points over the past 3 seasons unless they're playing Alabama. That's about it. That's about it for Georgia. They don't allow points. We know how good that defense has been over the last few years there. Can't score on them. And Fran Brown was not a main reason, but one of the reasons why. He's a very good defensive backs coach. So I would hope that he can help the players that are currently on the roster right now. I think I've kind of alluded to it, but as far as the top 5 defensive backs on the team, the guys who I can see being the starters if they're playing nickel, I think it would be Devin Grant as a corner and Jayden Bellamy as the other corner. You would still have Barron kind of as that rover, and then you would have Duce Chestnut, and who am I missing? Duce Chestnut and Alijah Clark. That's who I'm missing. Alijah Clark would be the safeties for the team next season. That's who I think would be the starters, but I think there's a lot of depth. I think it is certainly deeper. So overall, I would say that it is an upgrade from last season. I think the coaching, the fact that the players have extra year of experience, and the fact that they brought in players that have experience, that even if they're not playing, they can show the guys that might be younger than them that are playing the ropes a little bit. So that is it for this episode of Syracuse Football Positional Breakdowns, going over the defensive backs. If you like this video, click that like button. If you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back tomorrow. Probably not going to do another position group tomorrow. I will be doing them throughout the summer. Thinking about something different, so stay tuned for tomorrow's episode as well.